Namaste. Namaste and welcome to this short video about the sacroiliac joint and how to rebalance it if it's feeling a little bit out of alignment. So like many people, when I first came to yoga, which was a long time ago now, like 20 years ago, I was encouraged to go as far as I could in postures, and I was pretty flexible in those days in my 20s. So that meant that I could achieve poses that perhaps some stiffer bodies would be more challenged in. But unfortunately, it means that I overstretched all of the areas that support the back of my pelvis, and my sacroiliac joint is now a little bit sensitive to some of the movements that we do in yoga, particularly when we've got one leg doing forward movement and one leg doing a backward movement, or doing twisting when I am encouraged to go a little bit further than I would perhaps do if I was listening to my body a bit more. So like all people, occasionally that happens to me, and this is how I fix it when it's out of alignment. So the first thing to understand about the sacroiliac joint is the sacrum is the five fused vertebrae at the bottom of the spine. It looks vaguely triangular shaped, almost a little bit diamond shaped, and it attaches to the iliacus, the two hip bones at the back of the body. And in men, there are 3 points of contact, a little bit like putting your knuckles together. That's what the joint looks like. So in men, there are 3 points of contact, and in most women, there are only 2. And so women are less stable in this area because of the shape of our pelvis, because we're designed for childbirth and childbearing, and our pelvises are designed to be a little bit more malleable, a little bit more movey than men's are. So this is great in some ways, and it's challenging in other ways, and vice versa for the guys. So when you do a pose like a lunge, let's look at the lunge a little bit. You've got the legs as they come into the hips are doing different things. One is forward bending, the thigh is coming towards the torso, and one is backward bending, the thigh is moving behind the hip joint. And if you're encouraged to go very deep into your lunge, then you've got very extremes. The full expression of the splits, for example, would be even more so. So in your lunge pose, the legs, the effect of the legs coming into the hips pulls those two sides of the pelvis in different directions. And if you do something like revolving extended side angle pose, Parivriti Bakonasana, then you come into a lunge and then take a twist, which then puts torsion across the low back as well. So this further exacerbates the problem. So if you find after a lot of unilateral yoga practice, or the other poses that can cause problems or potential problems, not everybody has this, but potential problems are trikonasana, where you've got the back hip revolving behind you and the front hip trying to stay out to the side. So if you are trying to over square your hips to the side edge of the mat, then the two sides of the pelvis are trying to open in different directions. If you do a Sacroiliac trikonasana, where you allow the back hip to fall forwards and then take your triangle pose, then you're a little bit more balanced in the pelvis, and therefore that's a little bit of a kinder option if you are particularly open in your pelvis, or if you have that challenge with the sacroiliac joint. Whilst it's not universally the case, people who have had children via natural childbirth sometimes find that challenge with their sacroiliac joint a little bit more prominent. And the way that you feel it is a dull ache, usually only on one side of your pelvis. Sometimes it feels like it's in the buttock, sometimes it feels like it's in the hip joint itself, sometimes it's just across the low back, but it's a dull ache. most of the time anyway. Sometimes it is really debilitating, and I'm going to stop talking about how awful it is and tell you how to fix it instead. So my preferred way to fix or to treat this imbalance is to use a squashed ball. So this is a Pilates ball. I've taken most of the air out of it, not most of the air out of it, but quite a lot of the air out of it. So it squashes to about half its normal height. And I'm going to lie down and place this underneath the back of my sacrum. So I'm lying on my back. I'll just pop that block out of the way. And this one has a place where the air goes in that has a hard piece of plastic. So I'm going to put that on the floor. And I'm lifting my hips to place the ball underneath the sacrum. So I want to support that part of the back of the body where the spine comes into the pelvis. It's almost like a place where the body crosses. So if you think about, if you feel your hip bones at the front of your body, you want to take your hands directly around and feel the ball is there at the back of your body where your hip bones are at the front of your body. You might feel a little bit into the top of the buttocks, a little bit into the small of the back as well as the ball squashes out. And so first, you can just let your body be supported by this ball and relax the arms out to the side. And you'll know fairly immediately if this feels therapeutic or not. And if it does, that's great. And if it doesn't, then you can move on to one of the other options. So I'm trying to do something that alleviates my sacroiliac imbalance and also helps to stabilize that joint. And to stabilize it, I need to fire up the deeper muscles, not the superficial muscles so much, which we use a lot, we focus on a lot in yoga, but the deeper muscles in the lower abdomen. And so to do that, I'm going to tip my pelvis forwards and backwards. It's a really subtle movement, rocking on this ball forwards and backwards without moving my knees and focusing on feeling that firing, that activation across particularly the very low part of the stomach, of the abdomen rather. So forwards and backwards. Forwards and backwards is, I find, a little bit easier than going side to side, which is what we're doing next. So just rocking side to side, trying not to move the knees at all. It's pretty tough. And it's a really subtle movement. We're not trying to move the whole body. We're trying to just move around this sacrum area and just outside of it. And when I move side to side, I can really feel the muscles firing down across this space just inside those hip bones on the front of the body. And when you've done a little bit forwards and backwards and side to side, you can do something a little bit like going round the clock. So you can imagine that 12 is up here and 6 is down between your knees. And you can start at 12 and roll around the clock face, going from 1 to 6 and then 6 to 12. And just really slowly rolling around so that you trace the line of the clock or the numbers on the clock with your pelvis without moving your knees, just firing those deeper muscles and going in both directions as well. So this, you will feel as you do it, trains and activates those deeper muscles in the abdomen, the lower part of the abdomen, which help to stabilize and activate our core to stabilize the work that goes on in the back of the body. So that I really love to do. It's a really good thing to do daily, particularly if you have sacroiliac issues, challenges, and then just gently releasing. And I like to counterpose this by just rolling onto my front and lying on my belly for a few moments, supporting the head with the back of the hands. Now here, when we lie on our bellies, the best thing to do for our sacrums is, if it's comfortable for you, to just take your legs a little bit apart, not too far, let the toes fall inwards towards each other and the heels fall outwards. And you can play with that a little bit. So you can lie here in a nice relaxed way and just try bringing the heels of the feet towards each other and feel what happens in the backs of the legs, the buttocks, the low back, and then just allow the heels to fall apart. And somewhere as you move the heels in and out, you will be aware of perhaps the sensation of release or relax as the sacrum lets go, as the muscles around it. The sacrum itself isn't going to let go, of course. So once you find your comfortable spot, taking some deep breaths and letting those deep breaths be with a very soft abdomen. So we've activated the abdomen quite strongly with the work on our ball, and we want to counterpose that with a little bit of release and also a sense of release across the back of the body. So whilst we're not so aware sometimes of the firing of deeper muscles in the back of the body when we work on the ball, it does happen. So we still want to release them. And this position of the back is the most restful for the spine, because the spine is in its natural S-shaped curve in this position, but on a hard floor surface, not on your bed, okay? So once I've done this a little bit, I'm going to roll back onto my back. And there are lots of other things that I can do to stabilize and improve. So one of them is drawing one knee towards me and pressing my hand away at the same time as I draw the thigh towards me and lengthening the opposite leg. I like to hover my feet off the floor, but if you want to, you can rest the back of the leg down. And you can also see if it feels comfortable once you've tried that drawing in and pushing away, those two opposing forces, as strongly as feels comfortable, you'll feel that again firing in your in the back of your body. And if you're going to do this with the floating leg, you should do this with the leg pressing down as well. Then you can hug this leg as close to your body as feels comfortable. And sometimes that gives people a little bit of relief, because it depends on whether your sacrum is forward of the pelvis or backwards of the pelvis. So if it gives you some relief, that's great, keep doing it. And if it doesn't, then try something else. Again, with the other side, drawing the thigh back towards you, pressing the thigh away at the same time, pressing the opposite leg down into the floor, or floating the leg, whichever feels like it's most therapeutic for you. And then hugging that leg in. If you get your sacroiliac discomfort on one side of the body, you may only need to do one side of the body. So explore and investigate what works for you best. So then there's a really nice practice on a block that allows us to realign the sacrum, and it's the one that I use most often if I feel my sacrum go out. So for this, I'm going to place the block underneath my body so that the, if you imagine this block like a book, so the spine of the book is aligned with my spine. So it's along the length of the spine, and the block is on its medium setting. So again, it's lifting the hips, placing the block underneath the body. And I want to support the sacrum at that space behind these hip bones, but I don't want that block to come too far up my low back, because that's generally not so comfortable. But the block will therefore be along the length of the buttocks between them. And then here, again, you can simply just hold here, perhaps with the feet a little bit further away from the body, and see if it feels comfortable. If it doesn't feel stable, you might want to raise the block a little bit, perhaps not. It's up to you, just find your place. And then we play with extending one leg and then the other. So making sure that you're stabilizing with one leg and stretching the opposite leg out. Now, here we've got those two legs doing something slightly different, but it's about the same shape. But if we want to realign that sacroiliac joint, then we have to have the two legs doing opposite things. So bending the opposite knee in towards you and holding onto it so that you draw that knee towards you to create that little bit of traction. Some people might not need to hold the knee, that's okay. Then for me, I need to float the other foot off the floor and almost balance. So finding balance on this very narrow section of the block. And that supports the sacrum and allows the two sides of the pelvis to do their thing until things slot back into place. And for some people, just tapping your heel on the floor and moving the heel towards the opposite side and then out to the side you're working with a few times, just tapping or swaying with the foot off the floor or the heel just gently grazing the floor. When you're ready, you can bring that leg in and take your opposite foot down. Feel the stability in the pelvis. Just check to see if it feels better. And then if you want to, you can do the opposite side. So this is actually the side that I need to do. This is the side where I get most of my displacement. So it's a case of finding what works for you. So for some people, you might not need to do the tapping or the swaying or the floating or the balancing. It might be enough just to have your extended leg heel rested down on the floor and the opposite knee into the chest. And for some people, you'll be able to do this on the lowest setting of the block without needing to directly support the sacrum on its own. And so when you're ready, you can support your pelvis again with both feet on the ground and knees bent. And just take a moment to see if you can release some of the effort. So when you've got sacroiliac imbalance, we tend to grip quite hard in the buttocks and activate sometimes muscles that are less helpful to help to hold ourselves away from that discomfort. And then I like to come down in stages. So pressing the heels into the floor, lifting the buttocks off the block, and then setting it on its lowest setting, like a book lying flat, resting the pelvis down just for a moment, just to give that sense of ease and releasing slowly so you don't hold a posture and then come out of it really quickly. And once you've had a few deep breaths here, you can lift the hips again and just slide the block out so that the pelvis rests on the floor. And again, perhaps this is a really good release for you. It's a little counterpose to the back bending you've just done, but with the knees together, a very gentle sway of the knees from side to side can also be a nice relief. So you're not twisting so far that you're pulling the pelvis in two different directions. You've got the knees together so that the pelvis is moving as a unit instead of the two sides moving separately. And then when you're ready, you can come up into sitting. And so the things to perhaps avoid is the wrong word, but to be taken care of when you're practicing yoga with this kind of imbalance is anything where the pelvis tries to move in two different directions at the same time. So very, very strong seated twists where you don't allow the pelvis to move as the spine moves can create that torsion across the low back. Some of the standing lunges and particularly twisted lunges, trikonasana, sometimes the warrior poses as well. So just explore with yourself. And the things that can destabilize the area are lots and lots of hip stretches. So many people think they need to stretch their hips because they're stiff there, but the hips are much more complicated than just a linear movement. So lots of pigeon pose, for example, isn't helpful if your sacroiliac joint is sensitive or if it's loose. And just watching out for some of those stronger releasing poses. The one that I sometimes have a problem with is Janu Shirshasana. So it's a forward bend with one leg extended and one knee bent. And when you forward bend in this position, this back leg is anchoring your pelvis backwards. But the front leg, your body is moving with the shape that your front leg is in. So again, you get that twist across the pelvis. One side of the pelvis is anchored back, the other is trying to move with your spine. So this can be less helpful, for example, than a forward bend with both legs extended. But seated forward bends in general are more challenging for those with a sacroiliac imbalance. I hope you found this useful. If you have any questions or if you ever need advice about your body and the way it responds to yoga, then please don't hesitate to write me a message or comment below. Namaste.